she had two letters in her pockets. Left pocket, the scholarship fell through. Right pocket. The nursing program said yes, but only if she answered by midnight tonight. She'd been carrying both since morning. She hadn't answered either. Instead, she was sitting in a free clinic waiting room on the south side of Chicago at 2:14 in the afternoon, sewing her winter coat with dental floss, because her hands needed something to do while her head tried to figure out how a person chose between the life they had and the life they were afraid to want. The coat was 6 years old. She'd sewn the same seam 4 times. She was going to sew it a fifth. The man sat down next to her. Plain jacket, jeans, the kind of face that had made a lot of decisions and wasn't finished making them. He looked at his phone, then at his shirt, then at her hands, at the floss, at the needle. He reached into his pocket and took out a button, looked at it, looked at her. "Could I borrow that?" he said. "When you're done." She looked at the button. She looked at him. She held out the needle without finishing the seam. He took it, turned it over in his hands the way you held something you hadn't held in a long time. "I don't know how to do this," he said. The 7-year-old on Sarah's left looked up from her book. "I can show you," Maya said. "It's not hard. You just have to be willing to try." Sarah looked at her daughter. At 7 years old, telling a stranger that trying was the entry point. She thought about the letter in her right pocket. She kept sewing. Sarah had known about the nursing program for 8 months, not the acceptance, the possibility. She'd picked up the brochure at this same clinic on a Tuesday in March, waiting for Maya's annual checkup, and had read it the way she read things she couldn't afford to want. Carefully, at arm's length, building the case against it while she read, so that by the time she finished, she'd already talked herself out of it. It hadn't worked. She'd taken the brochure home. She'd put it in the drawer under the utility bills, not thrown away, not on the refrigerator, the drawer. The place for things that weren't decisions yet. She'd applied in June, not with hope exactly, with the specific contained pragmatism of someone who had learned that hope was expensive and that the application itself was free and that you could apply for a thing without committing to wanting it. She'd committed somewhere around August. She hadn't told anyone. Not her sister in Milwaukee, who would have said, "Sarah, that's amazing," in a way that would have made not getting in worse. Not Mrs. Patterson next door, who watched Maya on Tuesday and Thursday nights, and who Sarah already owed more than she could repay in casseroles. Not Maya, who was 7, and who processed uncertainty by asking questions Sarah didn't have answers to. She'd carried it alone, which was not unusual. She'd been carrying things alone for 4 years, since Kevin. Since the February morning he'd gone to work and hadn't come home, and the world had reorganized itself into before and after, with no warning and no instructions for how to live in the after. The coat was from before. Kevin had bought it, the winter Maya was born. A real winter coat, the kind with the goose down and the serious zipper and the warranty card still in the pocket, because Kevin kept warranty cards. He'd handed it to her in the hospital room, still in the bag, because she'd been too pregnant in November to buy a coat, and he'd done it without being asked. She'd worn it every winter since. The seam at the left cuff had started going in year 3. She'd sewn it with regular thread. It had held for 4 months. Then she'd tried the dental floss. Stronger, thinner, more resistant to the repeated stress of a cuff that got grabbed and pulled every time Maya reached for her hand in a parking lot or a crosswalk, or any of the 100 daily moments when a 7-year-old needed to be connected to her mother. The dental floss had held for 8 months. She kept a needle in her wallet now. 1 needle. Because 1 was enough if you were careful, and being careful was something she'd gotten very good at. The scholarship letter had come on Thursday. Not the nursing program, the scholarship she'd applied for to cover the gap between what the program cost and what she had, $4,200. She'd found 3 scholarships that fit her profile, applied to all 3. This was the last one. "We regret to inform you." She'd read it on the bus on the way to work Thursday morning. She'd put her phone in her bag. She'd worked her full shift. She'd picked up Maya from Mrs. Patterson's. She'd made dinner. She'd waited until Maya was asleep, and then she'd sat at the kitchen table and done the math again. The same math she'd done in June and August, and every time the doubt got loud enough to require evidence, the math said no. $4,200 was 4 months of rent, Was the car insurance and the electric bill and the new shoes Maya needed and the dental appointment Sarah had been rescheduling since September? Was the buffer she kept in the account for the category of things she couldn't predict? And things she couldn't predict always happened, had always happened, would always happen. And the buffer was what stood between managing and not managing. The math said no. The acceptance letter had come Friday morning. She'd stared at it for a long time. We are pleased to offer you a place in the licensed practical nursing program beginning January. Please confirm your enrollment by November 14th. November 14th. Today, she had until midnight. She'd put the acceptance letter in her right pocket and the scholarship rejection in her left, and she'd gotten Maya ready and taken the bus to the appointment. And she'd been sitting in this chair for 20 minutes, and she'd been sitting in this chair for 20 minutes doing the math in her head for the 11th time when her hands had needed something to do. The coat was in her lap. The needle was in her wallet. The dental floss was in her bag. She'd sewn this seam 4 times. She knew exactly how to do it. Which angle, how tight, how far from the edge to keep the floss from pulling through. She'd learned by failing the first time and adjusting the second and getting it right the third and confirming it the fourth. That was how she learned most things, by doing them until they worked. She thought about the math. She thought about $4,200. She thought about Kevin handing her the coat in a hospital room and the warranty card still in the pocket, and the specific, ordinary confidence of a person doing something for someone they loved without making a production of it. She thought about what he would have said about the letter. She knew what he would have said. Kevin had been constitutionally incapable of saying no to the thing that was harder and better over the thing that was easier and fine. It was something she'd loved about him and something that had occasionally made the practical aspects of their life together more complicated than they needed to be. She thought about Maya, 7 years old, reading beside her. The book held with both hands, elbows on knees, entirely inside the story, in the way children were entirely inside things before the world taught them to be half somewhere else. Maya didn't know about the letter. Maya didn't know that her mother was sitting 3 inches away from her, trying to decide whether to say yes to a version of their life that was harder for the next 4 years and different after that, or no to a version that was the same as what they already had, which was not bad, which was manageable, which was fine. Fine. She'd been fine for 4 years. She was so tired of fine, she kept sewing. The man sat down at 2:14. She didn't look up. She heard him, the weight of him in the chair, the sound of him checking his phone, the small silence that followed when he stopped checking it and just sat. She kept her eyes on the seam. She was almost done. His name was Robert Haynes. Nobody in the waiting room knew that. He'd been careful about that. Had left the town car 2 blocks away. Had come in through the front door like everyone else. Had taken a number from the dispenser by the entrance. Before he remembered he wasn't actually a patient, he'd kept the number anyway. It gave his hands something to hold. He did that too, apparently. He'd been on the board of the Lakeview Community Health Foundation for 6 years. The foundation operated 4 free clinics across Chicago's South Side, of which this one, the Halsted Street location, was the oldest and by the numbers, the most efficient. 847 patient visits last month. Average wait time, 23 minutes. Overhead at 14% of operating costs, which was the kind of number that made foundation board members feel good about their charitable giving. He'd never visited, not once in 6 years. He'd read the numbers every quarter and approved the budgets and written the checks. Not small checks, real checks, the kind that came with naming rights. He declined, because naming things after yourself was something he'd decided early on he didn't need, and had told himself that the numbers were sufficient, that understanding a thing numerically was the same as understanding it. He'd been telling himself that about a lot of things lately. The acquisition offer had come in October. 1. $8 billion for Haynes Group, the full portfolio, real estate and healthcare properties, and the community investment fund he'd built over 29 years from a $40,000 loan from his mother that she'd made him promise to pay back, and that he'd paid back in 1999 with interest she'd refused to accept. The acquiring company was a private equity firm out of New York. They were good at what they did. He'd looked into them carefully. the way he looked into everything. They were disciplined, efficient, and reliably profitable. Their model involved acquiring underperforming or undervalued assets, restructuring costs, and generating returns for their investors over a 5 to 7 year horizon. Restructuring costs. He'd read the term in their proposal and had understood what it meant, and had moved on to the next page because he'd been reading acquisition proposals for 29 years, and restructuring costs was a standard term. And standard terms didn't require dwelling on. He dwelled on it at 3 a.m. on a Tuesday 3 weeks ago. He'd gotten out of bed and gone to his office and opened the acquisition proposal and gone to the section on the Community Investment Fund. Page 31, subsection 4, 3, and read the language he'd moved past the first time. Assets within the community investment portfolio will be evaluated for performance against standard market benchmarks. Properties and programs not meeting benchmark thresholds will be subject to restructuring or divestment within 18 months of acquisition close. He'd looked up the Halsted Street Clinic's numbers. Cost per patient visit, $127. Market benchmark for comparable services, $340, because comparable services in the private sector cost $340 per visit, which was why people came to a free clinic on Halsted Street instead. The clinic didn't meet the benchmark, not because it was inefficient, because the benchmark had been designed for a different thing. He'd sat in his office at 3 a.m. and understood that he was considering selling something he'd built to people who would measure it against a standard it was never designed to meet, and would find it wanting and would close it. He'd signed the LOI, the letter of intent, the following Monday, not because he'd resolved the 3 a.m. question, because 29 years of building things had produced a man who was very good at moving forward when moving forward was what was required, and the deal had a timeline, and the timeline didn't wait for 3 questions to get answered. He told his lawyer he needed a week before final signature. His lawyer had said, "The acquiring firm is not going to wait indefinitely." "I know," he'd said. 1 week. That had been Monday. Today was Thursday. He had 4 days. He'd come to the Halsted Street Clinic because he needed to see what he was deciding about, not the numbers. He knew the numbers, the thing the numbers described. He hadn't expected to need a button. The button had come off his shirt that morning. Third button from the top. The one that took the most stress from the way he moved his shoulders when he was thinking hard, which he'd been doing all day. He'd noticed it in the car and had thought, "I'll deal with it later." He'd been thinking that about a lot of things. He'd sat down in the waiting room and looked at his phone and then put his phone away, because looking at his phone was what he did when he didn't want to see what was in front of him, and he'd come here specifically to see what was in front of him. What was in front of him was a waiting room. 32 people, he'd counted. Not as an exercise, it was automatic, the habit of someone who had walked into a lot of rooms and had learned that counting was a way of seeing. 32 people in a waiting room that seated 40. The chairs worn at the armrests in the way chairs got worn when they were used every day for years. The wall with the health information posters in English and Spanish and Polish and Mandarin. 4 languages, because this was a neighborhood where 4 languages were necessary. And the clinic had understood that. He'd looked at the posters for a long time. Then he'd looked at the woman 2 seats down. She was sewing. Winter coat. Left cuff. The needle moving with the automatic precision of someone who had done this before. Not struggling, not improvising, doing a known thing in a known way. He'd watched for a moment before he realized he was watching. He looked at the button in his breast pocket. He'd put it there this morning so he wouldn't lose it. He looked at her hands. He looked at the button. He thought about 3 a.m., about benchmark thresholds and restructuring, and the specific distance between a number on a page and the thing the number was supposed to describe. He took out the button. He looked at it. He looked at her. "Could I borrow that?" he said, "when you're done." She looked at him, not with suspicion, with the quick, accurate assessment of someone who reads situations fast, because reading situations fast had been necessary for a long time. She held out the needle and the floss. Not when she was done, now, before she'd finished the seam. He took it. He turned it over. He had not sewn a button since 1987 in a dormitory room at the University of Illinois, with thread from a sewing kit his mother had packed in his dorm bag, along with a note that said, "You'll need this. Don't lose it." He hadn't lost it. He'd lost track of needing it. "I don't actually know how to do this," he said. The girl on the other side of the woman looked up from her book. 7 years old. The book held with both hands. She'd been so inside it he hadn't noticed she was there. "I can show you," she said. "It's not hard. You just have to be willing to try." He looked at her. At 7 years old, saying willing to try, like it was the obvious entry point, like the only real obstacle was the willingness. He looked at the button. "Okay," he said. Maya set her book face down on her knee, carefully, so she wouldn't lose the page, and leaned across her mother and showed him how to thread the needle. Her mother didn't look up from her own sewing, but she'd heard. Robert could tell she'd heard. She started with the needle. "You hold it like this," Maya said. "Not too tight. If you hold it too tight, your hand shakes and the thread goes wrong." Robert looked at how she was holding it. Loosely. 2 fingers. The confidence of someone demonstrating a thing they'd learned by getting it wrong first. He tried it. "Better," she said. "Now thread it." He looked at the eye of the needle. He looked at the dental floss. He had not done this in 37 years, and the eye of the needle was smaller than he remembered. Or his eyes were worse than he wanted to admit, or both. "Hold it up to the light," Maya said. "The window light. Not the ceiling light. Ceiling light is yellow. Window light shows you where the hole actually is." He turned toward the window. She was right. The hole appeared. He threaded it on the second try. Not the first. The first he was off by a millimeter, and the floss caught on the side and he had to start again. He didn't say anything about the first try. He just did it again. "Good," Maya said. "Now the button." She showed him where to position it, how to come up through one hole and down through the other, and why you went diagonal first and straight after. She used her hands to demonstrate. Small hands. The hands of someone who had been taught this the same way she was teaching him. By someone sitting next to her doing it first. He watched her hands. He thought about his mother's hands. She had packed a sewing kit in his dorm bag in 1987 and had said, "You'll need this," and he had needed it exactly once, in a dormitory room in Champaign, and then had stopped needing it because his life had organized itself into a shape where other people handled the things that required needles and thread. He'd thought that was progress. He was revising that. "Like this?" he said. Maya looked at his work. "The tension's off," she said. "You're pulling too hard. The button needs to sit on the fabric, not be pushed into it." He loosened his grip. "Better," she said. She went back to her book. He kept sewing. On his other side, Sarah had finished her seam and was examining it, running her thumb along the line of floss the way you checked work you'd done before and knew how to evaluate. She was satisfied. He could see that without her saying anything. She looked at his button. She didn't offer to help. He didn't ask. They sat in the same row of chairs in a free clinic waiting room and sewed in a silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The specific occupied silence of people doing something with their hands that didn't require conversation but didn't prohibit it either. "How's it going?" Sarah said, not looking at him, at the button. "Better than the first try," he said. "There's always a first try," she said. He looked at her. She was looking at her coat now. Not the seam she'd just finished, the coat as a whole. "The way you looked at something you'd been tending for a long time." "Old coat," he said. 6 years, she said. "Good coat," he said. She looked at him. "It was," she said. "Still is, mostly." He looked at the seam she'd just finished. The dental floss neat and tight, barely visible against the dark fabric. "The kind of work that required knowing what you were doing." "You've done that before," he said. "4 times, she said. This is the 5th. "Same seam?" "Same seam," she said. "I keep thinking it'll hold better next time." "Does it?" She thought about it. "About the same," she said. "But I know how to do it faster now." He tied off the button the way Maya had shown him, diagonal then straight. Not too tight. He bit the floss, no scissors, and looked at the result. It wasn't perfect. It was functional. He put the needle and the remaining floss on the armrest between them. "Thank you," he said. She took them back. Coiled the floss around 2 fingers, the way you coiled something you were going to need again. "You come here often?" she said. He looked at her. She was almost smiling. Not quite. The beginning of one, the expression of someone who had made a small joke and was waiting to see if it landed before committing to it. "First time," he said. "It's good here," she said. The almost smile gone, back to even. The doctors actually talk to you. Some places you feel like a number. He thought about 847 patient visits, about 23-minute average wait times, about overhead at 14%. How long have you been coming here? He said. 3 years, she said, since we moved to the neighborhood. Maya's doctor is here. Good doctor? She remembers things, Sarah said. Not from the chart, from last time. She asked Maya last visit how the spelling bee went. She paused. Maya had mentioned it 8 months earlier, just in passing. He looked at the hallway, where the examination rooms were. He thought about a doctor who remembered things from 8 months ago. He thought about benchmark thresholds. He thought about what didn't show up in a cost-per-visit analysis. What do you do? Sarah said. He looked at her. The question was direct in the way she was direct. Not prying, just ask. The way you ask someone in a waiting room, because waiting rooms made strangers briefly available to each other, in a way that other places didn't. He thought about what to say. He could say, real estate. True and incomplete. He could say, I run a company. True and incomplete. He could say, I own this building. True and likely to end the conversation in the specific way that conversations ended when the power dynamic became visible. I invest in things, he said. Properties, mostly. Some healthcare, she nodded. Not impressed, not unimpressed. Just receiving the information and filing. Is that how you ended up here? She said. Healthcare investment? Something like that, he said. She looked at him, reading him. He'd noticed she did that, quick, accurate, not unfriendly. You're not a patient, she said. No, he said. But you're not staff, she said. No, he said. She looked at the clipboard he'd set under his chair when he sat down, the one with the foundation's quarterly report he'd been reviewing in the car. She didn't ask about it. He respected that. The building, she said. Do you know who owns it? He was very still. Why? He said. The lease is up in 60 days, she said. OC mentioned it last week. She didn't make a big thing of it, but I could tell it was a big thing. She looked at the walls, at the 4-language posters, at the chairs worn at the armrests. Places like this don't just find new spaces. Not in this neighborhood. Not at a price that works. He looked at the quarterly report under his chair, at the line item he'd approved in 2019 when he'd offered the clinic a 10-year lease at below market rate. Because below market rate was what made the math work for them, and he'd had the building anyway. And the building needed a tenant. The 10-year lease had become a rolling annual renewal when the foundation's accountant had requested the change for tax reasons, and his property manager had approved it without flagging it to him. 3 years of annual renewals. The current renewal was the one his property management team had flagged for rate adjustment, 40% increase. Standard market correction, his team had said. Responsible asset management. He had not connected that memo to this clinic. He was connecting it now. I don't know who owns it, he said. The lie was automatic. He heard it come out and didn't take it back. She looked at him. Okay, she said. She knew. Not who he was, she didn't know that. But she knew the answer wasn't fully true. He could see it in the way she received it. No pushback, just a small adjustment. The way you adjusted when you got information you'd half expected. He looked at Maya. She had her book open again. The spine creased from reading. A library book. He could see the sticker on the cover. Your daughter, he said. She's good at teaching. Sarah looked at Maya. Something moved across her face. Not sentiment, recognition. The way you looked at someone when you saw them do something that confirmed what you already knew about them. She gets that from her dad, Sarah said. He waited. She didn't elaborate immediately. The waiting room hummed around them. The ambient noise of a room full of people, with somewhere to be after this, with things they were managing, with the particular patience of people who had learned that waiting was part of it, and that patience was not the same as resignation. He was a teacher, Sarah said. High school math. He used to say the hardest part wasn't knowing the answer. It was figuring out why the student thought the wrong thing was right. She paused. Once you understood the mistake, you could fix it. Before that, you were just talking past each other. Robert looked at Maya. At a 7-year-old who had told him the tension was off, and the button needed to sit on the fabric, not be pushed into it, and who had known which light to use to thread a needle. He sounds like he was good at it, Robert said. He was, Sarah said. He's been gone 4 years. He looked at the coat, at the seam she'd just finished, at the 5 times she'd sewn it back together. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that the coat hadn't already said. Dr. Amara Osei came out at 3:07. Not for Sarah. Sarah was still waiting, had been waiting 40 minutes, which she'd known going in because the Tuesday afternoon slot ran long, and she'd brought Maya's book and her own needle for exactly this reason. Dr. Osei came out for the man 3 seats down, who had a follow-up about his blood pressure medication, and who she called by his first name, Gerald, in the way she called everyone by their first name. Not as a policy, but as a practice. The way you used names when you understood that names were the smallest form of being seen. She stopped when she saw Robert. A half-second stop. Controlled. Professional. She looked at him. He looked at her. She continued walking. Sarah hadn't seen it. She was helping Maya find her page. Robert watched Dr. Osei walk Gerald to the examination room. She said something to Gerald that made him laugh. A real laugh. The kind that came from being at ease with someone, not from politeness. She held the door. She went in. Robert looked at the hallway, at the examination rooms, at the 4-language posters, at the 32 people, 30 now, 2 had been called, who were sitting in worn chairs, waiting to see a doctor who remembered things from 8 months ago. He picked up the quarterly report from under his chair. He turned to page 4. Patient demographics. 67% at or below federal poverty level, 23% uninsured, 41% with at least one chronic condition requiring ongoing management, 18% pediatric patients. He looked at Maya. 18% pediatric patients. She was reading again. Book held with both hands. The library sticker on the cover was from the Herald Washington branch. 3 bus stops from here. He knew because he'd looked at the neighborhood map in the car. He turned to page 7. Community impact metrics. This section was always his least favorite part of the report. It was where the Foundation's communications team tried to translate the work into language that made sense to donors, which meant it was full of phrases like transformative outcomes and sustainable health equity, and empowering underserved communities. Phrases that were true in the way that average things were true. Accurate across the whole, and imprecise about any particular part. He skipped to page 9. Financial projections. Operating costs trending 8% above prior year due to staffing adjustments and supply chain increases. Current lease terms. $4,200 below market rate. Annual renewal. Lease renewal pending. See Note 14. Note 14 was at the back. He turned to it. The clinic's current lease is subject to annual renewal at the discretion of the property owner. The Foundation has been notified that the upcoming renewal may reflect a market rate adjustment. Current projections indicate that an increase above 18% would require operational changes, including potential staffing reductions. An increase above 31% would require the Foundation to evaluate the viability of continued operation at this location. He read it twice. 40% increase. His property management team had recommended 40%. He'd received that recommendation in an email 3 weeks ago and had forwarded it to his assistant with a note that said flag for review, and had not reviewed it because the deal had been consuming everything, and he trusted his team to handle the operational details the way he always trusted his team to handle operational details. His team had handled it. They'd notified the Foundation. Sarah had found out from Dr. Osei last week. She didn't make a big thing of it, but I could tell it was a big thing. He put the report down. He looked at the room, at the chairs, at the posters, at the woman beside him who was reading over Maya's shoulder now. The 2 of them inside the same page, Maya's finger tracing a line of text she wanted her mother to see. He thought about the acquiring firm, about restructuring costs on page 31 of their proposal, about benchmark thresholds and what happened to things that didn't meet them. He thought about the clinic's cost per patient visit, $127. The benchmark was $340. The clinic was cheaper than the benchmark because it was efficient, because Dr. Osei remembered things from 8 months ago and called patients by their first names, and because the staff stayed, and staying meant they got better at the work, and getting better at the work meant the work cost less over time. The clinic was being measured by a benchmark designed for a system where staff turned over and patients were numbers and efficiency meant throughput. It wasn't inefficient. It was being compared to the wrong thing. He thought about Maya and the needle. Hold it up to the window light. Ceiling light is yellow. Window light shows you where the hole actually is. He'd been looking at the clinic under ceiling light for 6 years. He was looking at it under window light now. "Can I ask you something?" he said. Sarah looked up from Maya's book. "Yes," she said. "The clinic," he said. "If you could change one thing about how it runs, not the people, the system, what would it be?" She looked at him. The assessing look. Deciding if the question was real, she decided. "The prescription gap," she said. "Tell me," he said. "Dr. Osi can diagnose and prescribe," Sarah said. "But there's no pharmacy here. The nearest one that takes the sliding scale discount card is 14 blocks north for someone without a car in January with a sick kid. You get the prescription and then you have to get to the pharmacy and then you have to wait. And sometimes the pharmacy doesn't have it and you have to come back. By then it's been 3 hours and the kid is sicker than when you started." He looked at the report. There was no line item about pharmacy access. Not an oversight. It wasn't in the foundation's operating scope. It was adjacent to their work, not their work. A gap between things rather than a failure of either. The kind of gap that didn't show up in numbers. "Has anyone raised that?" he said. "With the foundation." "I mentioned it to the intake coordinator last year," Sarah said. "She said she'd pass it along." She looked at her coat. "I don't know if she did." He wrote it down, not on the report, on his phone, in the notes app, the way he wrote things he was going to do something about. Pharmacy access. 14 blocks. January, sick kid. She watched him write it. "You're not just an investor," she said. He looked at her. "What makes you say that?" he said. "Investors don't write things down in waiting rooms," she said. "They send emails." He looked at his phone. "I send a lot of emails," he said. "But you wrote this down," she said. He looked at the note. Pharmacy access. 14 blocks. January. Sick kid. Not a memo. Not an action item. Something more immediate than that. The specific notation of someone who had just understood something and needed to make sure they didn't ununderstand it by the time they got back to the office. "The building," he said. She looked at him. "I said I didn't know who owned it," he said. She waited. "I do," he said. She was very still. Not angry. Not surprised. The stillness of someone who had suspected something and was now receiving confirmation and was deciding how to respond to the confirmation. "Okay," she said. "The lease renewal," he said. "The rate adjustment my team recommended, I didn't." He stopped. "I hadn't connected it to this clinic specifically. I approved a process without understanding what the process was doing." She looked at him. "That happens," she said, not letting him off. Acknowledging it. The way you acknowledged things that were true without deciding yet what they meant. "It shouldn't," he said. "Not with this." She looked at the room, at the people in it. "What are you going to do?" she said. He thought about the acquiring firm, about the deal and the timeline and the 4 days he had before final signature, about benchmark thresholds and restructuring costs and the specific distance between a number on a page and the thing it was supposed to describe, about Maya holding the needle loosely, 2 fingers, and telling him the button needed to sit on the fabric, not be pushed into it, about ceiling light and window light, about what you saw when you finally looked at the right thing in the right light. "I don't know yet," he said, "but I'm going to figure it out." She looked at him, at the button on his shirt, slightly uneven, functional. "First try?" she said. He looked down at it. "Second," he said. She nodded. Like second was fine. Like second was actually how most things worked, if you were honest about it. Dr. Osi called Sarah's name at 3:34. "That's us," Sarah said. She stood up. Maya stood up. Maya picked up her book and her jacket and her small backpack with the efficiency of someone who had been doing waiting rooms long enough to have a system. Sarah picked up her coat. She looked at Robert. "Good luck," she said, "with whatever you're figuring out." "You too," he said. She almost said, "I don't know what you mean." She didn't. Because she did know what he meant, and saying she didn't would have been the same kind of lie he'd told her 20 minutes ago, and she'd decided she wasn't going to do that. She followed Maya down the hallway. Dr. Amara Ose had been running the Halsted Street Clinic for 9 years. She'd come from a residency at Cook County, and before that, from Accra, and before that, from a childhood in which her mother had taken her to a community health worker every time something was wrong, because community health workers were what was available, and what was available was what you used. She'd understood something from that early. that available mattered as much as excellent, that a good doctor 14 miles away was less useful than an adequate one 3 blocks over, that the geography of healthcare was not incidental to healthcare. It was healthcare. She'd built the Halsted Street Clinic on that understanding. 9 years. The chairs worn at the armrests, the four-language posters, Gerald's blood pressure and Maya's wellness checks, and the woman on Tuesday afternoons who always brought her own needle. She knew about the lease. She'd known for 3 weeks, since the property management company had sent the renewal notice, not to her directly, to the foundation's administrative office, from which it had made it to her desk via a forwarded email chain that had 4 people copied on it and no clear owner. She'd read it twice. She'd put it in her desk drawer. Not because she was avoiding it, because she'd learned, in 9 years of running a clinic on a budget that required annual renegotiation with reality, that some problems needed to sit for a few days before you knew what to do with them. That the first response was rarely the right response. That the space between receiving bad news and acting on it was not wasted time. It was the time in which you figured out what actually mattered. What actually mattered was the patients, not the building, not the lease. The people who came here because here was where they could come. She'd been trying to figure out how to protect that when the solution walked into her waiting room at 2:14 in the afternoon and sat down next to Sarah Mitchell. She'd recognized Robert Haynes immediately. She'd been on 2 foundation panels with him. She knew his face. She knew, from the panels, that he was the kind of person who asked the question after the presentation that everyone else had thought of and not asked, and that his questions were usually the right ones, and that he listened to the answers in a way that suggested he was actually going to do something with them. She decided not to acknowledge him. Not from strategy, from instinct. If he'd come here without announcing himself, he had a reason. Her job was to take care of her patients. His reason was his own business. She'd watched him sit down next to Sarah. She'd watched them talk. She'd watched Maya show him how to sew. She hadn't been able to hear the conversation, but she'd read enough of it from the hallway to understand that something was happening that didn't need her involvement. Sometimes the most useful thing you could do was stay out of the way. She brought Sarah and Maya into examination room 2. Maya climbed onto the table with the automatic ease of a child who had done this many times and had made peace with the paper that crinkled every time you moved. "How are you doing, Maya?" Dr. Osi said. "Good," Maya said. "I taught a man to sew a button in the waiting room." Dr. Osi looked at Sarah. Sarah looked at the wall. "Did you?" Dr. Osi said. "He didn't know how," Maya said. "I showed him. It's not hard." "No," Dr. Osi said, "it's not." She did the checkup. Methodical, unhurried, the specific pace of someone who understood that a wellness check was not just about the body, but about the conversation that happened while you were checking. The body. The things that came up when the child was distracted by the stethoscope and the parent stopped performing fine and said something real. Maya was healthy, growing well. Her reading level was 2 grades ahead, which Dr. Osi noted not as a data point but as something to celebrate, because it was something to celebrate. "Is she getting enough sleep?" Dr. Osi asked Sarah. "Usually," Sarah said. "Sometimes she reads too late. I use a flashlight," Maya said. "Under the covers?" Dr. Osi said. "The covers have good insulation," Maya said. "It doesn't bother anyone." Dr. Osi wrote something in the chart. Sarah almost smiled. Almost. Dr. Osi saw the almost. She finished the checkup. Maya hopped off the table and went to the chair in the corner and opened her book and was instantly gone into it. Dr. Osi sat down across from Sarah. "How are you?" she said. "Not Maya, you." Sarah looked at her hands, at the coat on her lap, at the seam she'd sewn for the 5th time. "I got into a nursing program," she said. Dr. Osi was quiet. "I have until midnight to respond," Sarah said. "And?" Dr. Osi said. "The scholarship I was counting on fell through," Sarah said. "There's a $4,200 gap." Dr. Osi looked at Sarah, at the woman who had been coming here for 3 years, who always brought her own needle, who had raised the pharmacy access issue last year and had not made a fuss when nothing had changed immediately. "Have you looked at the Foundation's Emergency Education Fund?" Dr. Osi said. Sarah looked at her. "The foundation that runs this clinic," Dr. Osi said. They have an emergency fund for patients pursuing healthcare education. It's not well advertised. Most people don't know about it. I didn't know about it, Sarah said. Most people don't, Dr. Osi said. It's on page 12 of the patient handbook that nobody reads. She paused. The maximum grant is $5,000. You'd need to apply tonight for it to be processed in time. Sarah looked at her. Why are you telling me this now? Sarah said. I've been coming here 3 years. Because you didn't tell me you'd applied to a nursing program, Dr. Osi said. You didn't tell me you were waiting on a scholarship. You didn't tell me you had until midnight. She looked at Sarah steadily. I can only help with what I know about. Sarah looked at the coat, at the letter in her right pocket, at the letter in her left pocket. I don't like asking, she said. I know, Dr. Osi said. That's why I'm telling you. So you don't have to ask, you just have to say yes. Sarah was quiet. In the corner, Maya turned a page. The paper crinkled slightly when she moved. The program, Sarah said. If I get in, if I do this, 4 years. It's going to be 4 hard years. Yes, Dr. Osi said. And after that? Dr. Osi looked at her. After that, you'd be an LPN, she said, with a license and options and the ability to work somewhere like here if you wanted. She paused. Or somewhere else. That part would be up to you. Sarah looked at the examination room, at the 4-language poster on the wall, at the chart with Maya's height measurement from last year with this year's mark 2 inches above it, at the window with the afternoon light coming through at the angle that showed things clearly. Window light. She thought about what the man in the waiting room had said. Not the part about owning the building. That part she was still deciding what to do with. The other part, I don't know yet. But I'm going to figure it out. She thought about Kevin, about what he would have said. She already knew what he would have said. She'd known since Friday when the acceptance letter came. She'd been arguing with the version of him in her head for 4 days. And he'd been winning since the beginning. And she'd been stalling because winning the argument meant doing the scary thing, and doing the scary thing meant the next 4 years looked different from what she'd planned. Different, harder. How do I apply? Sarah said. The emergency fund. Dr. Osi opened her desk drawer. She took out a form, 1 page. Not the 4-page version that the foundation sent to donors, the actual form, pre-filled with the clinic's information at the top. I keep them here, Dr. Osi said, in case. Sarah looked at the form, at the doctor who kept forms in her desk drawer in case, who remembered the spelling bee from 8 months ago, who called everyone by their first name, who had just told her about a fund on page 12 of a handbook that nobody read. Thank you, Sarah said. Fill it out before you leave, Dr. Osi said. I'll countersign. It goes in tonight. She stood up. She looked at Maya, still in the corner, still in the book. Maya, she said. Maya looked up. Your mom's going to fill out some paperwork. Tell me about the button. Maya closed the book on her finger to keep the page. He didn't know how to hold the needle, she said. He was holding it too tight. I told him to loosen his grip. Did he? Second try, Maya said. He got it the second try. Dr. Osi looked at Sarah. Second try, she said. Sarah picked up the pen. She filled out the form. Robert was still in the waiting room when Sarah came out. She hadn't expected that. 40 minutes since Dr. Osi had called her name. She'd filled out the form, which had taken 12 minutes because she'd read every line before she signed it, not from suspicion, from the habit of someone who had learned that documents meant what they said, and that reading them was not optional. She'd handed it to Dr. Osi. Dr. Osi had countersigned without hesitation, like she'd been waiting for this specific form from this specific person, and the waiting was finally over. Sarah had put the acceptance letter back in her right pocket. She'd thrown the rejection letter away. Not crumpled, folded once and placed in the recycling bin by the examination room door. Because even things you were done with deserved to be handled properly. Left pocket, empty now. Right pocket, the thing that was open. Robert was in the same chair. The quarterly report was on his knee, but he wasn't reading it. He was looking at the wall, at the 4-language poster specifically. The one about blood pressure management that had been there so long the bottom corners had started to curl. He looked up when they came out. Kwasas and Maya went straight to the chair next to him and sat down and reopened her book to the page she'd been keeping with her finger the whole time she was in the examination room. Robert looked at Sarah. She sat down. Not next to him, Across, in the chair she'd been in before, because that was her chair, and she'd left her coat on it, and it was still there. She picked up the coat. She looked at the seam. "How'd it go?" he said. "Good," she said. "Maya's healthy." "And the other thing?" he said. She looked at him. He'd heard enough of her conversation with Dr. Osi to know there was an other thing. She'd known that when she came out and saw him still sitting there. "I filled out a form," she said. "The emergency fund," he said. Not a question. She looked at him. "You know about it," she said. "I funded it," he said, in 2018. "It was supposed to be for patients pursuing healthcare education. I haven't looked at utilization since 2019. She looked at the coat in her lap. "Page 12 of the patient handbook," she said. "I didn't write the handbook," he said. "But you funded the thing on page 12, she said. "Yes," he said. "And didn't check if anyone was using it," she said. "No," he said. She looked at him, not accusatorily, with the same flat, assessing attention she'd been giving him since he sat down, reading for what was actually there, rather than what she wanted to be there or feared might be there. "You've been funding things without checking if they work," she said. "I've been reading reports about whether they work," he said. "That's not the same thing." "No," she said. "It's not." He looked at the report on his knee, at the quarterly numbers he'd been reading for 6 years. 847 patient visits, 23-minute average wait, overhead at 14%. None of those numbers had told him about the form on page 12 of the patient handbook. None of them had told him about Gerald's laugh, or the pharmacy 14 blocks away, or the woman who brought her own needle. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "You keep asking that," she said. "Just ask." He looked at her. "The coat," he said. "Why not get a new one?" She looked at the coat. She'd been asked this before, not directly, not in words, but in the way people looked at it sometimes, the specific quality of attention that meant they'd noticed and had formed a conclusion. She usually didn't answer. She answered now. "Kevin picked it out," she said. "He didn't ask my size, he just knew it. Brought it to the hospital in a bag, still tagged, warranty card in the pocket." She paused. "He kept every warranty card, for everything we owned, in a folder in the filing cabinet." Another pause. "I still have the folder." Robert looked at the coat. "Getting a new one feels like." She stopped. "It's not about the coat." "I know," he said. "It's about what it means to keep sewing it," she said. "Every time I think I'm done with it, I sew it again. I don't know if that's—" She stopped again. "I don't know what that is exactly." "Keeping something alive," he said. She looked at him. "Maybe," she said. "Or refusing to decide it's over." He was quiet. She was quiet. Maya turned a page. "I have a decision to make," Robert said, "about selling my company." She looked at him. He hadn't planned to say that. It came out the way things came out when you'd been holding them for too long, in a room where the quality of attention made holding them feel unnecessary. $8 billion, he said. "Private equity firm. They want the full portfolio." She didn't react to the number. Not a world of dark. Not from indifference, from the specific practice neutrality of someone who had learned that other people's large numbers were not hers to have feelings about. "What's stopping you?" she said. "This," he said. "Places like this. They'd close it? Not immediately," he said. "They'd measure it against benchmarks it was never designed to meet and find it wanting and make decisions accordingly." She looked at the room. "And you'd let that happen," she said. "If I sign the deal," he said. "Yes." "Why would you sign it?" He looked at his hands, at the button Maya had taught him to sew, slightly uneven, functional. "Because I've been building things for 29 years, he said, and won. 8 billion now means I don't have to anymore." She looked at him. "Do you want to stop?" she said. He opened his mouth, closed it. "I thought I did," he said. "And now?" He looked at the quarterly report. At pharmacy access. 14 blocks. January. Sick kid on his phone. At the form on page 12 that he'd funded in 2018 and hadn't checked since 2019. At the 4-language poster with the curling corners. At Maya reading. At Sarah's coat. "I think I confused being tired with being done," he said. She looked at him. "Those are different things," she said. "Yes," he said. "Being tired means you need to rest," she said. "Being done means you stop." He was quiet. "Which one is it?" she said. He looked at the window. The afternoon light coming through at the angle that showed things clearly. Not the ceiling light, the window. The light that showed you where the hole actually was. "I don't know," he said. "But I think I've been using one to avoid answering the other." She looked at her coat, at the seam she'd sewn 5 times. I did that too, she said, with the letter. I kept thinking the scholarship falling through was the answer, that it was the universe telling me no. She paused. It wasn't the universe. It was just a scholarship falling through. And the other letter? He said. She put her hand on her right pocket. Still there, she said. What are you going to do? He said. She thought about Dr. Osi keeping forms in her desk drawer in case, about Kevin's warranty cards in a folder in a filing cabinet, about Maya with the book held in both hands entirely inside the store, about second try. Say yes, she said, tonight, before midnight. Even with the 4 years, he said. Because of the 4 years, she said. The 4 years are the point. You don't get to where you're going without the 4 years. He looked at his phone, at the note he'd written, at the deal timeline on his calendar. 4 days to final signature. He thought about tired and done. About 29 years of building things. About whether he was tired of building or tired of building the way he'd been building from a distance through reports, under ceiling light. He thought about today. About a waiting room and a woman with dental floss and a 7-year-old who showed him which light to use. He hadn't built anything today. He'd sewn a button. And he'd understood more about what he'd built in the last 2 hours than in the last 6 years of quarterly reports. That wasn't being done. That was being shown a different way to do it. Robert, Sarah said. He looked at her. Whatever you decide, she said. Decide it in the right light. He looked at the window, at the afternoon coming through clean and clear. Yes, he said. I will. Robert left the clinic at 4:15. Not because he was done, because he'd been there 2 hours, and the waiting room had cycled through 3 sets of patients, and he was the only person who had come in without a medical reason, and staying longer felt like taking up space that belonged to someone else. He stood on the sidewalk outside. Chicago, in November. The wind coming off the lake with the specific, personal quality of Chicago wind. Not incidental, intentional. The kind that made you understand why people who grew up here walked differently from people who hadn't. He called his lawyer. Richard answered on the second ring. The deal, Robert said. I need to add a condition. Silence. The specific silence of a lawyer recalibrating. Robert, Richard said carefully. The acquiring firm has been clear that the terms are, I know what they've been clear about, Robert said. Add the condition. Community health properties in the portfolio, the clinic on Halsted specifically, and the other 3 foundation-operated locations are carved out of the restructuring provisions. Lease terms frozen for 10 years at current rates. Foundation funding maintained at current levels as a condition of close. They won't accept that, Richard said. Then we don't have a deal, Robert said. Robert won. $8 billion. I know the number, Robert said. I've known the number for 3 months. Add the condition. Richard was quiet. If they walk, he said. Then I have a company to run, Robert said. Differently than I've been running it. He hung up. He stood on the sidewalk. He thought about tired and done. He was tired. He was not done. Those were different things, and he'd spent 3 months treating them as the same thing, and the confusion had almost cost him something he hadn't understood the value of until a woman with dental floss showed him which light to use. He took out his phone. He opened the Notes app. Pharmacy access, January. Sick kid. He added a line. Fix this first. He put the phone away. He looked at the clinic building, his building. The sign by the door, Halsted Street Community Health Center. Open Monday, Saturday, 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. All patients welcome. He'd approved that sign in 2015, had seen it in a design mock-up and said yes and had not thought about it since. All patients welcome. He'd built that. He'd almost sold it to people who would have unmade it. He started walking. Sarah said yes at 11:47 p.m. Not midnight, 11:47. She'd been sitting at the kitchen table since 9 after Maya was asleep, with the acceptance letter in front of her and her phone in her hand, and the form she'd filled out at the clinic sitting beside the letter because Dr. Osi had given her a copy to keep. She'd been ready to say yes since 4 o'clock. She'd waited anyway, not from doubt. From the specific private ritual of a person who understood that some decisions deserved to be sat with before they were sent, that the sending was different from the deciding, and that the time between them was not wasted. She'd looked at the coat on the back of the chair, at the seam she'd sewn that afternoon. She'd thought about Kevin, not with grief, with the specific different thing grief became after 4 years. When the sharpness had gone and what remained was something more like conversation, she thought toward him the way she'd always thought toward him when she had something to work out, not expecting an answer, using the direction of him as a way of organizing what she actually thought. She knew what he would have said. She'd known since Friday. She typed her response to the nursing program. I am pleased to confirm my enrollment. Thank you for this opportunity. She hit send at 11:47. She put the phone face down on the table. She sat in the quiet kitchen for a moment. Then she picked up the coat. She turned it over in her hands. The seam at the left cuff, 5 repairs, the most recent done that afternoon with dental floss in a clinic waiting room. While a stranger asked to borrow her needle, she ran her thumb along it. Still holding, she thought about what Robert had said. I think I confused being tired with being done. She thought about 4 years. About what 4 years looked like from the inside. Long, daily, the specific accumulation of small hard things that didn't feel like progress while you were in them and looked like progress only from the other side. She thought about Maya teaching a man to sew a button. It's not hard. You just have to be willing to try. She folded the coat carefully. She put it on the back of the chair. She went to check on Maya, asleep. The book on the nightstand, closed now, the library sticker catching the light from the hallway. The flashlight under the pillow. She hadn't used it tonight, had fallen asleep before she'd gotten to it. Sarah stood in the doorway. She thought about 4 years from now, about Maya at 11, old enough to understand what her mother had done and why, about what it would mean to have done it. She went to bed. She slept better than she had in 4 days. Richard called Robert at 9 a.m. Friday. They accepted the condition, he said. Robert looked up from his desk. The carve-out, Richard said. Community health properties. Lease terms frozen 10 years. Foundation funding maintained. A pause. They pushed back hard. I told them it was non-negotiable. They came back this morning. Why did they accept? Robert said. Because the rest of the portfolio is worth $1. $8 billion and 4 clinics aren't what they're buying, Richard said. The clinics are a rounding error to them. They'd rather have the deal. Robert thought about that. 4 clinics. A rounding error to a private equity firm. 847 patients a month. Gerald's blood pressure. Maya's wellness checks. The form on page 12 that Sarah Mitchell had filled out at 3:47 in the afternoon. And that would be processed by end of week. A rounding error. Close the deal, Robert said. You're sure? Richard said. Close it, Robert said. With the condition. He hung up. He opened his notes app, Pharmacy Access, 14 blocks, January, sick kid. Fix this first. He picked up the phone again. He called the foundation's executive director. She answered on the second ring. The pharmacy gap, he said. Halsted Street. I want to plan on my desk by end of month. A pause. Robert, she said. We've had that on the list for 2 years. I know, he said. Put it at the top. He hung up. He looked at his shirt, at the button Maya had taught him to sew, slightly uneven. The tension a little off. He'd gotten better by the end, but the beginning showed. Functional. He thought about second try, about first tries and second tries, and what it meant to show up to a thing you didn't know how to do and do it anyway. He'd been running things from a distance for a long time. He wasn't going to stop running things. He was going to get closer, starting with the pharmacy, starting with page 12, starting with the things that didn't show up in quarterly reports until someone who used them told you about them in a waiting room while you were trying to sew a button. He opened a new document. He typed at the top, what else don't I know about? Not a question, a list. 3 months later, Sarah wore the coat to her first day of class. Not a new coat, the same one. The seam at the left cuff had held through November and December and into January. She didn't know if that was the dental floss or the angle, or just that this time she'd known exactly what she was doing. Probably all 3. Maya walked her to the bus stop at 6:47 in the morning, dark still. January in Chicago didn't negotiate with sunrise. At the stop, Maya took her hand. Not because she was cold. You nervous? Maya said. Yes, Sarah said. That's okay, Maya said. Nervous means it matters. The bus came. Sarah got on. She found a seat by the window and watched Maya on the sidewalk. One hand raised, not waving exactly, just visible, making sure her mother could see her until the bus turned the corner. Sarah kept her eyes on her until the corner. Then she looked forward. Across the city, the pharmacy opened in April, not 14 blocks away, in the clinic. Robert had been to Halsted Street 4 times since November. Not to inspect, to sit in the waiting room and see who came in. He always took the chair by the right side window, the one with the wall view. The one where the window was the only thing to look at. He was learning to see what was there. The warranty card was still in the coat pocket. Sarah had found it again in February, reaching for her bus pass. She'd held it for a moment. Then she'd put it back. Some things you kept, not because they were useful, because they were true. Subscribe if you're new. Share this with someone who has something in their right pocket tonight, and tell me in the comments. What are you sewing back together? I read everyone. See you in the next story.